All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly charged, really intense interview with security expert Rev Lottie Thompson regarding Nigeria's current crisis. We're looking at a conversation that originally aired on Adiola Fayahan's channel, and it dives deep into the escalating insecurity across Nigeria. Now, Rev Thompson has a heavy background in peace and security at the African Union level, and he presents some incredibly direct and, frankly, controversial claims about the absolute root causes of the nation's instability. Our goal here today isn't to take sides, right? We're just going to impartially break down the exact arguments, the allegations, and the radical prescriptions laid out in the source material, so you can really understand the core of this complex debate.
To keep things organized and totally objective, we're mapping this out using a problem-cause-solution framework. So our agenda today is 1. Nigeria's escalating security crisis. 2. Allegations of internal complicity. 3. The international lobbying battle. 4. A deep generational divide. And finally, 5. Controversial solutions for security. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Nigeria's escalating security crisis. Let's start by establishing the immediate, on-the-ground events that really prompted this whole discussion. Just imagine waking up to this kind of news week after week. This timeline starkly illustrates the rapid, devastating succession of kidnappings. It serves as the focal point for this entire analysis. We're looking at 3 massive incidents occurring within just a few weeks of each other, completely spread across different states. The source uses this timeline to highlight what is described as a fundamental failure in the most basic responsibility of governance, which is the protection of lives and property. It's exactly this specific wave of violence that sets the stage for the rest of Thompson's critique.
Rev Thompson absolutely does not hold back here. He forcefully critiques the military's approach. He directly challenges the commander-in-chief, arguing that there's this deliberate refusal to identify who the nation is actually fighting. And he specifically calls out these highly controversial programs where captured terrorists, individuals allegedly responsible for the deaths of actual Nigerian soldiers, are placed into so-called de-radicalization camps. According to the interview, these individuals are then absorbed right back into the Nigerian army, literally serving alongside the comrades of the soldiers they previously fought. The source uses this to argue that the military strategy isn't just flawed, it's deeply, fundamentally compromised.
Moving right along to Section 2, allegations of internal complicity. Because to find the root causes, the source actually points the finger straight inward. Now, this number is absolutely staggering. Out of roughly 240 million people in Nigeria, the interview alleges that fewer than 150 internal moles, sitting right there in the corridors of power, are responsible for destabilizing the entire nation. Thompson argues that if the government were to just name these individuals, whose identities he claims are practically an open secret in the Nigerian social sphere anyway, the crisis could be aggressively dismantled. So you might think this is fundamentally a religious conflict, right? Well, according to the source, it's actually not. Instead, it's described as a merciless, implacable supremacist agenda. It's basically using religion merely as a disguise to divide the populace, all while systematically infiltrating key national pillars, like the judiciary, the education system, and governance structures. The assertion here is that this agenda is explicitly designed to collapse the nation from the inside out.
All right, shifting gears to Section 3, the international lobbying battle, because this explainer now moves from domestic borders straight to the international stage. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this problem, the source alleges that up to $150 million was funneled into Washington lobbying. Why? To neutralize U.S. intervention and deny reports of a Christian genocide. Thompson claims that when former U.S. President Donald Trump began to directly intervene and show unprecedented support for vulnerable groups in Nigeria, the Nigerian government officially poured massive amounts of money into American lobby firms. The stated goal here was to control the narrative and totally dampen any international enthusiasm for helping Nigeria. This feeds into a much broader and frankly scathing critique of the international system. The interview highlights a profound frustration with foreign lobbying structures. It specifically calls out American PR and lobbying firms, accusing them of being totally devoid of conscience and literally profiting off the blood and misery of Africans. The argument presented is that the money that should be spent protecting citizens at home is instead being used to buy silence and political cover abroad, and that makes it crystal clear to Nigerian youth that their salvation is absolutely not going to come from Washington, D.C.
Okay, Section 4, a deep generational divide. To really grasp the solutions Thompson proposes later, we first have to look at the demographics. Just look at this demographic reality. It's honestly wild when you think about it.
You have a massive youth majority being governed by a tiny, tiny fraction of older leaders. People under 35 make up over 70% of the population, while those 65 and above account for less than 3.5%. From a global perspective, that is a massive power imbalance. The source emphasizes this immense statistical power to argue that the younger generation absolutely has the sheer numbers to completely reformat the nation. But there's a catch. They have to stop looking up to the older generation for solutions.
Thompson draws a super stark contrast here. He labels the older political class as an analog, wicked generation that weaponizes poverty and literally trades tomorrow to enjoy today. To drive this point home, he compares the African culture of blind obedience to elders to the tragic 2014 South Korean ferry disaster. If you remember that tragedy, obedient students dutifully followed instructions to just stay in their cabins while the captain fled, which resulted in hundreds of preventable deaths. The warning to the digital youth is deadly serious here. Blindly following the current system will lead straight to your destruction.
Because of this, Thompson uses a really heavy phrase. He describes the state as a deterministic chaos construct. So, what does that mean? Basically, he's saying it operates on a complex, weaponized system of poverty, ethnic division, and patronage. It's an ecosystem engineered by the older generation to sustain itself through chaotic complexity. The interviewer insists that the youth cannot defeat this system by simply joining it or running for office. To Thompson, entering the current political machinery is a total joke because the system is mathematically designed to neutralize anyone who tries to play by its old rules. Which brings us to Section 5, the final piece of our framework, controversial solutions for security.
Since trying to fix the current political system from the inside is described as dead on arrival, the source drops these seriously drastic, controversial measures to force systemic change. First, halt national elections entirely, arguing that voting in a fundamentally flawed system is just pointless. Second, establish regional defense organs, because there is a total lack of confidence in the federal government. Third, and this is probably the most explosive point, enable a responsible gun culture so citizens can actually protect themselves from armed predators. And fourth, bypass traditional physical protests entirely and go all in on massive digital mobilization.
Let's unpack that digital mobilization strategy because it's fascinating. To avoid the deadly physical risks we saw during past physical protests like NSARS, Thompson advocates for this highly specific, sophisticated digital playbook. Step 1. Issue a direct ultimatum to the president to define the enemy within 14 days. If that's ignored, Step 2 is deploying a custom app to instantly gather 10 million signatures from Nigerian youth, creating undeniable, nonviolent leverage. And Step 3 involves taking the cultural code of Nigeria's southwest region, which the source claims has maintained religious tolerance for 1,600 years without a single religious war, upgrading that code and exporting it across the nation to cure these engineered divisions. This all boils down to the underlying philosophy of these solutions, what the source calls the architecture of thought. The wealth and survival of a nation, according to the interview, no longer relies on physical resources or analog structures. It relies entirely on advanced, digital, sophisticated thinking. The youth have to rely on their connected, globally minded intellect to outsmart the predators of the older generation. It's basically a call to shift the battlefield away from the physical streets, where they risk being slaughtered, straight into the digital realm, where their sheer numbers and ideas just cannot be suppressed.
So, based on all the allegations and arguments in this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves a profound question. Can digital innovation and a massive demographic advantage truly dismantle generations of entrenched political chaos and violence? Rev. Lottie Thompson lays out a stark, highly controversial roadmap that totally bypasses traditional democracy in favor of direct digital intervention and self-defense. Whether you view these solutions as a necessary evolution or as dangerous radicalism, they undeniably highlight a breaking point in the trust between Nigeria's youth and its governing institutions. And that leaves us wondering, what actually happens when the digital majority finally decides it's just not gonna follow the analog captain anymore?